You are not exhausted because the truth is complicated. You are exhausted because you keep carrying evidence into rooms where evidence has no authority. You explain, clarify, simplify, and provide one more example, believing that patience will eventually defeat resistance. But a closed mind does not experience your explanation as a gift. It experiences it as an attack on the story that protects its pride. That is why explaining your logic to someone who has no intention of understanding you is not nobility. It is intellectual suicide. You spend attention, time, and emotional control while the other person spends nothing. They can distort one sentence, ignore 10 facts, and force you to start again. The conversation looks mutual, but the cost is not mutual. Arthur Schopenhauer studied this asymmetry with unusual brutality. In the notes published after his death under the title The Art of Controversy, he described eristic dialectic, the art of winning a dispute whether one is right or wrong. His point was not that every disagreement is corrupt. His point was that human beings often enter argument with vanity already attached to a conclusion. Once identity is fused with a position, correction feels less like information and more like humiliation. Modern psychology gives this old observation a sharper vocabulary. Motivated reasoning describes the way people evaluate evidence according to the conclusion they want to protect. Psychological reactance explains why pressure can make a person defend the very belief you are trying to change. Research on identity-protective cognition shows that intelligence does not automatically dissolve bias. Sometimes intelligence simply gives bias a better lawyer. So, the intelligent person needs more than arguments. You need selection. You need to identify when a mind is reachable, when a conversation is useful, and when your silence is not surrender, but conservation. Before we begin, write this in the comments. My mind is not public property. The first principle is identify the real objective of the conversation. Before you answer a claim, determine what the other person is actually trying to obtain. Some people want truth, some want status, some want reassurance, some want to make you perform submission while pretending to ask for clarification. If you misread the objective, even a perfect argument becomes the wrong tool. Consider Ignaz Semmelweis in 19th century Vienna. In the 1840s, he observed that women in the first obstetrical clinic died from childbed fever at far higher rates than women in the second clinic. After a colleague died following a scalpel injury, Semmelweis connected the disease to contaminated material carried by physicians from autopsies. He introduced hand washing with chlorinated lime, and mortality fell dramatically. The evidence was powerful, but the social meaning was unbearable. Accepting Semmelweis meant accepting that respected physicians had carried death on their hands. His colleagues were not merely being asked to update a medical procedure. They were being asked to revise their moral image of themselves. The factual dispute was entangled with status, identity, and shame. Schopenhauer's warning fits a principle Machiavelli returned to repeatedly. Human conduct must be judged by effective conditions, not by flattering appearances. A conversation may wear the appearance of inquiry while functioning as a contest for rank. Strategy begins when you stop naming the appearance and start reading the function. This is the structure of identity threat. When information endangers a valued self-concept, the mind may defend the self before it evaluates the evidence. The listener is no longer asking, "Is this true?" The listener is asking, "What happens to me if this is true?" Until you recognize that second question, You will keep sending facts into a psychological courtroom where the verdict was decided before the trial. Most people respond to resistance by increasing volume and detail. The strategic person pauses and diagnoses the hidden reward. Is the other person trying to understand the issue, preserve face, entertain an audience, or make you beg for legitimacy? The answer determines whether you should explain, ask a question, document the facts, or leave. Imagine a meeting in which a co-worker says, "You always make projects more complicated than they need to be." You begin listing every decision, every deadline, and every constraint. 10 minutes later, you are defending your character instead of discussing the project. A more intelligent response is shorter. Ask, which specific decision do you believe created unnecessary work? Now the accusation must become evidence. If the person names a real problem, you can solve it. If they refuse and return to vague attacks, you have learned that the objective was not clarity, it was positioning. Train yourself to ask 3 silent questions before every difficult explanation. What result would count as understanding? What evidence could change this person's mind? What social reward are they receiving from disagreement? If no result is defined, no evidence is admissible, and conflict itself is the reward, the intelligent move is not a better speech. It is an exit. This is not about treating everyone who disagrees with you as inferior. That would be another form of intellectual weakness. It is about refusing to confuse disagreement with good faith. A capable mind remains open to correction while protecting itself from conversations designed only to consume it. The second lesson is this: test for intellectual reciprocity. Do not give a full lecture before the other person has demonstrated the smallest capacity to exchange. Understanding is reciprocal. If you are the only one defining terms, answering objections, admitting uncertainty, and correcting errors, you are not in dialogue. You are providing free labor to someone committed to remaining unchanged. Suppose a relative says, "You think you are better than everyone because you changed careers." Instead of delivering your life history, say, "Tell me what I have done that made you feel dismissed." If they give a concrete example, listen. If they answer, "You know exactly what you did," do not volunteer 10 possibilities and prosecute yourself on their behalf. You can say, "I am willing to discuss a specific event, but I will not defend myself against an undefined charge." Then stop. The pause is not hostility. It is a test. You have made mutual clarity the price of continuing. Reciprocity is a diagnostic tool because it makes the social cost visible. Ask the person to state your position in a form you would recognize. Ask what evidence would cause them to revise their conclusion. Ask them to name one uncertainty in their own argument. These are small acts of intellectual exchange. A person seeking truth can usually attempt them. A person seeking domination will treat the request as an insult or evade it. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments in the 1950s showed how social pressure can distort public judgment even when the correct answer is visually obvious. Participants were asked to match the length of lines. When Confederates deliberately gave the wrong answer, many participants conformed at least once despite seeing the contradiction. The experiments did not prove that people are mindless. They demonstrated that a judgment can be shaped by the social cost of dissent. In argument, the same pressure can operate in reverse. A person may reject your reasoning not because they cannot follow it, but because agreement would separate them from a group, a family identity, or a political tribe. Schopenhauer's catalogue of disputational tricks was built on this distinction. The dishonest disputant changes the subject, attacks the person, widens the claim, or uses the audience as a weapon. You do not defeat those moves by producing an encyclopedia. You defeat them by refusing to finance the game. Most people prove sincerity by giving more. They answer every question, tolerate every interruption, and expose every premise. The strategic person requires a deposit before extending more credit, not money. Evidence of good faith. Use the principle of the smallest reversible investment. Offer one explanation, one example, or one source. Then observe what happens. Does the person engage with what you actually said? Do they update even slightly? Or do they move the goalposts and demand another performance? Intelligent people do not confuse endless access with generosity. A person may struggle to articulate themselves because they are anxious, inexperienced, or emotionally flooded. Give room for that. Reciprocity does not require eloquence. It requires visible effort. The difference between limitation and bad faith is not brilliance, it is willingness. Before we continue, write this: I require reciprocity, not permission. The third law you must understand is separate ignorance from bad faith. Not knowing is curable. Refusing to know is a strategy. The intelligent person must distinguish the two, because compassion is useful with the first and dangerous with the second. Machiavelli's political analysis is useful here because he separated declared intentions from operational behavior. People may declare that they want understanding while behaving in ways that make understanding impossible. Judge the pattern, not the slogan. Charles Darwin spent more than 2 decades developing the argument that became On the Origin of Species. He did not treat every objection as proof of stupidity. He corresponded widely, collected contradictory observations, studied domestic breeding, and addressed serious difficulties in his theory. His caution strengthened the work because legitimate criticism was incorporated rather than merely defeated. But Darwin also understood that no theory could be defended against every imagined objection in a single exchange. Scientific reasoning advances through testable claims, accumulated evidence, and revision. It does not advance by satisfying a person who changes the standard each time an answer arrives. Most people interpret persistence as sincerity. They think that because the other person keeps asking, the other person must care about the answer. The strategic person watches the direction of the questions. Are they narrowing toward understanding or multiplying to prevent closure? Ignorance usually produces questions that become more precise as information is supplied. Bad faith produces questions that become more vague, more personal, or more numerous. Ignorance can say, I do not understand this step. Bad faith says, nothing you say will ever be enough, while avoiding the burden of defining enough. Researchers studying conversational cooperation describe communication as a joint activity. Both parties have to coordinate attention, meaning, and standards. When one party repeatedly violates that coordination, the failure is not purely intellectual. It is relational. Imagine someone asks why you rejected a business proposal. You explain that the projected cash flow depends on an unsupported growth rate. They do not address the number. They ask whether you are afraid of risk. You answer that risk is acceptable when priced correctly. They ask why you are always negative. The subject has moved from the projection to your personality. Say, the decision rests on the growth assumption. If you have evidence for that assumption, I will review it. I will not debate my character as a substitute for the numbers. This sentence isolates the question and blocks the escape route. Do not use the phrase bad faith as a weapon whenever you feel challenged. Sometimes your own explanation is incomplete. Sometimes the evidence is weak. The discipline is bilateral. Demand standards from others and submit your own claims to the same standards. Keep a mental ledger of movement. After 2 or 3 exchanges, ask whether the conversation has become more specific. If not, summarize the unresolved point once, then withdraw. Your intelligence should be measured not only by what you can explain, but by what you refuse to explain indefinitely. Now comes the 4th principle. Replace lectures with precise questions. A long explanation gives a resistant person 20 surfaces to attack. A precise question gives them one responsibility. Questions are not always softer than statements. Used correctly, they are sharper. Most people use questions as disguised speeches. They ask, "Do you not realize how ridiculous that is?" The strategic person asks questions that could produce information. The aim is not humiliation. The aim is to transfer part of the cognitive burden back to its owner. The Socratic method was built around disciplined questioning rather than the delivery of conclusions. In Plato's dialogues, Socrates often asks a person to define a virtue, follow the consequences of that definition, and confront the contradiction created by their own answers. Whatever one thinks of Socrates as a historical figure, the method demonstrates a durable principle. People resist conclusions imposed from outside, but contradictions discovered through their own reasoning are harder to dismiss. This did not make Socrates universally loved. Athens eventually condemned him to death. The example is not proof that questions guarantee persuasion. It is proof that inquiry can reveal whether a person is capable of examining the structure of a belief. Psychological reactance rises when people feel their freedom of judgment is being threatened. Commands such as, "You must admit," this can trigger resistance independent of the evidence. A well-designed question preserves agency while exposing the cost of inconsistency. What evidence supports that conclusion? What would you accept as disconfirming evidence? Would you apply the same standard if the roles were reversed? Schopenhauer observed that disputants often extend a claim beyond its original boundary, so that it becomes easier to attack. Precise questions reverse that maneuver. They narrow the field until the real proposition stands alone. A manager tells you that your performance is disappointing, but provides no examples. You could defend your entire year. Instead, ask, which measurable expectation did I fail to meet? If the answer is, it is more of a feeling, ask, what observable behavior would demonstrate improvement? Now the conversation must either become actionable or reveal that the vagueness is intentional. The same principle works in relationships. When someone says, "You never care," do not respond with a catalogue of sacrifices. Ask, what happened this week that made you feel uncared for? A specific answer opens a door. A refusal tells you the accusation may be functioning as leverage. Build a small arsenal of clean questions. What exactly are you claiming? What evidence would change your mind? What standard are we using? Are you asking for information or for agreement? What action do you want from me? Each question removes fog. People who depend on fog will become uncomfortable. Let them. Questions can also be used cruelly, as traps designed to embarrass. That is not intelligence. It is performance. The ethical use of questioning gives truth a chance to appear and gives manipulation fewer places to hide. Drop this in the comments. My questions protect my energy. The 5th shift is protect the frame before defending the fact. The person who defines what the argument is about often controls the argument. If you accept a false frame, every answer makes you weaker. During the 1960 presidential debates in the United States, listeners and viewers did not always evaluate the same event in the same way. The familiar account is that radio listeners were more favorable to Richard Nixon, while television viewers responded to John F. Kennedy's visual composure. Later scholarship has complicated how universal that split was, but the debates still illustrate a basic truth. Presentation shapes. Interpretation before detailed policy is processed. A frame tells the audience which facts matter and what those facts mean. Once the frame becomes, "he is defensive," every clarification looks like more defensiveness. Once the frame becomes, "she is selfish," every boundary becomes proof. Framing effects show that choices and judgments change depending on how equivalent information is presented. In conflict, framing is often moral rather than numerical. A request for time becomes abandonment. A refusal becomes arrogance. A correction becomes disrespect. If you answer inside that language, you silently accept the accusation embedded within it. Suppose a colleague says, "Why are you trying to sabotage the team by questioning this plan?" If you answer, "I am not sabotaging anything," you have entered their courtroom. Say instead, "Raising a financial risk is part of protecting the team." The question is whether the risk is real. Then return to the evidence. In a personal conflict, someone may say, "If you loved me, you would answer immediately." Do not debate the depth of your love. Say, "Love does not require permanent access. I will answer when I am able to speak constructively." The frame has shifted from emotional loyalty to reasonable conditions. Most people rush to disprove the fact while leaving the frame untouched. The strategic person corrects the frame first. "I am not refusing to help. I am refusing to accept responsibility for a deadline I did not create. I am not avoiding the conversation. I am ending a conversation that has become abusive." Machiavelli understood reputation as a political reality because people act on appearances. The lesson is not to become false. It is to recognize that a fact without a frame can be captured by someone else's story. Protecting the frame does not mean controlling every interpretation. You cannot force another person to see you accurately. It means refusing to collaborate in your own misrepresentation. Listen for loaded nouns and verbs: selfish, disloyal, difficult, cowardly, obsessed, dramatic. Ask what neutral description lies underneath. Replace the verdict with the behavior. Instead of "you are controlling," say, "You called 6 times after I said I was unavailable." Observable language is harder to weaponize. The sixth truth is harder to accept. Let evidence perform where ego cannot. Some truths become weaker when you advertise them too aggressively. When evidence can speak through results, repeated self-defense is often a confession of insecurity. Credible signals are costly or difficult to fake. A completed project, a recorded result, a consistent pattern of behavior, or a transparent metric often carries more weight than self-description. This is why saying "I am reliable" has less force than being the person whose work arrives on time for 6 months. In 1919, expeditions led by Arthur Eddington and Frank Dyson observed a solar eclipse to test a prediction associated with Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity, that gravity would bend light. The measurements and the publicity around them helped transform Einstein into an international figure. The historical details and later reanalysis of the data are more complex than the popular legend, but the strategic lesson remains. A public test changed the status of an argument more effectively than personal insistence could. Einstein did not need to win by declaring himself a genius in every room. A theory made a risky prediction. Observers attempted to measure it. The result entered a scientific process larger than personal reputation. Machiavelli judged rulers by what their institutions and decisions produced, not by the beauty of their declarations. Intelligent people apply the same severity to themselves. They stop narrating the person they intend to become and start creating evidence that the person already exists. A client questions whether you can manage a larger account. You could describe your ambition for 20 minutes, or you can propose a limited pilot with clear milestones, reporting rules, and an exit condition. The pilot converts opinion into observation. A relative says your new routine will not last. Do not announce your discipline every morning. Let 90 quiet days answer. People can argue with your intention. They struggle to argue with a pattern. Most people try to repair doubt through explanation. The strategic person asks what observable consequence would make the explanation unnecessary. They move from verbal defense to designed evidence. Whenever you feel the urge to prove yourself, ask, what can I build, record, complete, or repeat that would carry this argument without my voice? Then direct energy toward that artifact. Your calendar, bank statement, portfolio, boundaries, health markers, and completed obligations can become witnesses that do not get emotionally tired. Results do not settle every moral question, and success does not make every method legitimate. Evidence must be relevant to the claim. But when the claim concerns competence, reliability, or progress, demonstration is cleaner than performance. Write this now. Results speak without begging. The seventh discipline is withdraw before contempt changes you. Remaining in a degrading argument can make you resemble the person you entered to correct. The danger is not only wasted time, it is character contamination. You are arguing by message. The other person ignores your answer and sends 3 new accusations. Your hands are tense. You begin drafting a paragraph designed not to clarify, but to injure. That is the exit signal. Write 1 sentence. This conversation is no longer productive. I will return to the practical issue tomorrow if we can discuss it without personal attacks. Then close the application. Do not monitor whether they are typing. Do not return for the last word. Most people leave only after they have delivered the perfect final blow. The strategic person leaves when the conditions for thought have disappeared. They do not wait for rage to grant permission. Machiavelli warned that hatred is politically dangerous because it changes the field from negotiation to destruction. The private version is equally real. Leave before a solvable disagreement becomes a campaign of mutual humiliation. Abraham Lincoln learned this lesson painfully. In 1842, after anonymous and mocking letters were published against Illinois State Auditor James Shields, Lincoln became involved in a dispute that escalated toward a duel. The confrontation was diffused before the men fought, but the episode embarrassed Lincoln. He rarely discussed it later. The future president had allowed satire, pride, and public honor to move him toward a violent ritual he did not truly want. Intelligence did not protect him from escalation, only interruption did. The transformation is not that you become silent in every room. It is that your speech becomes selective. You stop explaining because anxiety demanded it. You stop treating every accusation as a summons. You stop entering debates in which the other person controls the rules, rejects every standard, and charges you for the privilege of being misunderstood. Real intelligence includes restraint. It knows that truth deserves defense, but it also knows that not every audience deserves access to the defense. It can admit error without kneeling before manipulation. It can teach without begging. It can walk away without needing the other person to agree that walking away was justified. The next time someone pulls you into a circular argument, do not ask, "How can I finally make them understand?" Ask, "What evidence shows that understanding is even the goal?" That question may save hours, relationships, projects, and pieces of your self-respect. Drop this final affirmation in the comments. I do not waste intelligence on closed doors. If this changed the way you think about conflict, like the video and subscribe. The most dangerous mind is not the one that speaks the most. It is the one that knows exactly when speech has stopped serving truth.